Hello guys, this is your friend Multiverse Shinobi 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was banished from Konoha Part 1? The weight of the ledger. The Kyuubi's chakra did not smell like fire. It smelled like copper, heavy and wet, like an open vein after the rain. Naruto sat on the polished floor of the council chambers, his knees pulled tightly against his ribs. The fabric of his orange jumpsuit was stiff with dried river mud and darker, rust-colored patches that didn't belong to him. His fingernails were split down the quick, packed with the black soil of the Valley of the End. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. The internal injuries from Sasuke's Chidori were technically healed. The red chakra had stitched the flesh together with jagged, hurried efficiency, but the skin there felt thin, like wet parchment stretched over a drum. The boy is an unstable variable, Homura Mitokado's voice drifted down from the high dais. It was dry, like old scrolls turning in an archive. The Uchiha prodigy was nearly lost because the Jinchuriki cannot govern his own output. He brought the boy back, yes, but at what cost to the village's future diplomatic leverage? Naruto didn't look up. He was watching a small bead of water drip from his sleeve onto the tatami mat. Drip. Drip. He kept his promise to the civilian council's interest, Kaharu Udatane countered, though her tone held no warmth. She sounded like an accountant balancing a ledger where the numbers didn't quite add up. But the damage to the infrastructure during the pursuit, the exposure of the seal's weakness to Orochimaru's scouts. We cannot ignore the vulnerability. He saved Sasuke. A voice rasped from the corner. It was Jiraiya. The Sannin was leaning against the heavy oak pillar near the exit, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was shadowed, the broad lines of his forehead creased with something that looked suspiciously like exhaustion. Or guilt. He wasn't looking at Naruto either. He was looking at the floorboards between them. The kid did exactly what the mission parameters demanded. He neutralized the defector and brought him within the borders. He brought back a corpse that happens to still be breathing, Jiraiya-sama, Danzo Shimura said. The old man's voice was the only one that didn't vibrate with the false solemnity of the others. It was flat, heavy, and functional. The Uchiha is in the intensive care unit under full Anbu guard. His chakra coils are scarred by the Kyuubi's residue. If the boy remains here, the Uchiha will never fully integrate back into the military structure. The resentment is a seed that will bear bitter fruit. Naruto's thumb twitched. A corpse that happens to still be breathing. He remembered the sound of Sasuke's ribs giving way under his fist. He remembered the look in Sasuke's eyes, the red Sharingan spinning with a hatred so pure it had felt like a physical weight pressing down on Naruto's chest. Why didn't you just stay down, Naruto? Where is Grandma Tsunade? Naruto asked. His voice was too small for the room. It didn't sound like the boy who shouted from the top of the Hokage monument. It sounded like an echo in an empty well. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a heavy blow. The Hokage is currently occupied with emergency surgeries for the recovery team, Homura said, his spectacles catching the dim light of the lanterns. She has delegated this hearing to the civilian and elder councils to avoid emotional conflict. She's not here. Naruto's fingers curled into his palms until the scabs on his knuckles cracked open again. She's saving Neji. She's saving Choji. She's saving the people who actually belong to this place. The decision has been reached prior to this session, Danzo said, standing up. The movement was slow, deliberate, the rustle of his robes sounding like dry leaves on a grave. Under Section 4, Article 12 of the Hidden Leaf Charter concerning the management of high-risk assets during times of reconstruction, Naruto Uzumaki is hereby relieved of his duties as a shinobi of Konohagakure. Quote. The words didn't make sense at first. Relieved of duties. Like being told he didn't have to clean the training ground after hours. You're stripping his rank. Jiraiya's voice dropped an octave, the Sannin's posture shifting, a faint trace of red chakra flickering at the edges of his boots. He's 12. Danzo. He's the fourths. He is the container. Danzo interrupted, his single visible eye fixing on the Sannin with the cold precision of a hawk. And the container is leaking. If he remains within the walls, Akatsuki will find him. If Akatsuki finds him here, the village becomes the battlefield before we have recovered from Orochimaru's strike. He will be removed from the registry. His forehead protector will be surrendered to the archive. Quote, banished, Naruto whispered. The word tasted like ash. Exiled, Kaharu corrected. For a period of no less than 5 years, or until such time as the administration deems the internal seal stable enough to withstand foreign extraction attempts without risking the surrounding populace. Quote, the corridor outside the council room was long and gray. Jiraiya walked a half-step behind him, his wooden sandals clicking against the stone with a rhythmic, irritating regularity. The Sannin didn't speak until they reached the threshold of the main gates, where the orange light of the setting sun was hitting the rooftops of the village, turning the tiles the color of dried blood. Naruto, Jiraiya started, his hand reaching out toward the boy's shoulder. Naruto didn't look back, but his posture went rigid. Don't. The Sannin's hand hovered in the air for 3 long seconds before dropping back to his side. The old fools are terrified. With the third gone and Tsunade still trying to steady the ship, they're grasping at anything that looks like control. This isn't permanent. They took the band, Naruto said. He reached up, his fingers touching his bare forehead. The skin there felt cold, exposed to the evening wind. The metal plate was sitting on Homura's desk now, next to the inkpots and the tax records. They took the leaf. A piece of tin doesn't make you a ninja, Jiraiya said, his voice rough. We'll go. I'll take you out past the fire borders. We'll train. We'll make you so strong that when you come back, they won't have a choice but to. No. Jiraiya stopped. What? You're staying here, Naruto said, his voice perfectly level now. The shaking had stopped somewhere around the 3rd flight of stairs. Grandma needs you. The village needs the Toad Sage. If you leave with the exile, it looks like a rebellion. That's what Danzo wants, right? To say you're a traitor too. The Sannin looked down at the boy. For the first time, he didn't see Minato's features or Kushina's wild temper in the kid's face. He just saw an old house that had been burned out from the inside. I can't let you wander the territories alone, kid. The Akatsuki. The fox won't let me die, Naruto said, turning his head just enough for Jiraiya to see the profile of his face against the dying sun. The whisker marks on his cheeks looked deeper, darker, like small scars left by claws. He likes living too much. I'll go to the northern borders first. The old training grounds near the Tanzaku region. Quote, Naruto. Don't follow me, Jiraiya-sensei, Naruto said. It was the first time he had used the formal titles since the training trip began. It felt like a wall being dropped between them, 12 inches of solid lead. If you follow me, I'll just run faster. The apartment was exactly as he had left it 3 days ago. An empty cup of instant ramen sat on the small table by the window, a green crust of mold just beginning to form on the rim. The bedsheets were tangled, thrown back in a hurry when the alarm had sounded for the Sasuke recovery mission. He didn't pack much. A single canvas pack he'd found in the trash behind the item shop 3 years ago. 2 changes of clothes, not the orange ones. He found an old gray tunic from his academy days that still fit if he didn't button the collar all the way up, and a pair of dark blue trousers with frayed hems. He left the frog wallet on the table. It was fat with small coins, the allowance Tsunade had given him for groceries. He didn't want their money. He didn't want anything that had the stamp of the Leaf Treasury on it. As he reached for the door handle, a shadow shifted on the windowsill. Naruto didn't draw a kunai. He didn't have any left anyway. They'd been confiscated at the gate along with his flak jacket. You're really going, Shikamaru said. He was sitting with his legs dangling over the edge of the roof, his gaze fixed on the Hokage monument in the distance. The stone faces looked flat in the twilight, their eyes blank. The old guys said I'm a hazard, Naruto said, his back still to his friend. It's a drag, Shikamaru muttered. He sounded tired. More tired than he had after the Chunin exams. His arm was still in a sling from his fight with Tayuya, the white cloth clean against his dark vest. The whole village is talking about it. They're saying you failed the mission. They're saying you tried to kill the Uchiha. Did they say if he's going to wake up? Soccer is with him, Shikamaru said softly. She hasn't left the room since yesterday. She didn't come to see you off, Naruto. Naruto let out a small, dry breath that might have been a laugh if there was any air behind it. She shouldn't. I didn't keep the promise. Nobody expects a 12-year-old to fight a curse mark at stage 2, Naruto, Shikamaru said, his voice sharp. Ending just a fraction. He stood up on the windowsill, his shadow falling long and thin across the floorboards of the small apartment. The council is using you to cover up their own oversight. If we had more backup. It doesn't matter, Naruto said. He pulled the straps of his pack tighter against his shoulders. Tell Choji to eat more meat. Tell Kiba his dog smells like wet grass. Naruto. Goodbye, Shikamaru. Quote. The Nara didn't follow him down the stairs. He knew about shadows. He knew that when the light goes out altogether, you can't trace them anymore. The northern gate was unguarded except for two Chunin Naruto didn't recognize. They looked at his bare forehead, then at his pack, and then at the paper Donzo's office had sent down by Messenger Hawk. Move along, the one on the left said, not looking Naruto in the eye. Don't hang around the perimeter after dark. The patrol scripts are automated now. Naruto stepped through the threshold. The gravel road under his sandals felt different here. It wasn't the smooth, packed dirt of the village streets. It was rocky, uneven, full of small roots that tripped the feet if you weren't paying attention. He walked for 3 hours without looking back. When the moon reached its peak, high and silver above the treeline, he stopped by a small stream that cut through the valley. The water was clear, reflecting the stars like tiny, cold chips of flint. Naruto knelt down, dipping his cupped hands into the water to drink. As he did, the reflection shifted. The water didn't show his face. It showed a massive, slitted crimson eye, the pupil vertical and sharp as a butcher's knife. You look pathetic, the voice rumbled from somewhere behind his breastbone, making the water in the stream ripple with the vibration. The brat from the Uchiha clan takes a piece of your meat, and the sheep discard you like an old bone. Quote. Naruto washed his face, the cold water numbing the whiskers on his skin. Shut up. They will come for us now, the Kyuubi sneered, its chakra warming the back of Naruto's neck like a fever. Without the walls, without the Sannin to watch your back, the others will smell the grease on your skin. They will hunt you, Uzumaki. Naruto stood up, looking north toward the dark, jagged line of the mountains where the leaf borders ended and the no man's land began. Let them come, Naruto said to the dark. I'm not running anymore. The sound of leaving. The rain in the land of fire always felt different depending on which side of the wall you were on. Inside Konoha, the rain was a minor inconvenience. It meant wet laundry, slippery training logs, and civilian shopkeepers pulling in their awnings while complaining about the damp. But out here, 3 miles past the border stone where the moss grew thick and undisturbed, the rain was an apex predator. It melted the dirt roads into knee-deep mirrors, turned the pine needles slick as oil, and washed away any tracks a stray 12-year-old might la. Avenue behind. Naruto didn't stop to build a shelter. He didn't have a tarp anyway. His canvas pack had grown 3 times heavier, soaked through with muddy water that leaked into his spare trousers. His wet hair clung to his forehead, dripping into his eyes, but he didn't brush it away. Without his forehead protector, his forehead felt massive, empty, and strangely cold, like a house with the front door left open. Hey! A voice called out from the brush behind him. Naruto didn't turn around. His right hand instinctively dropped to his hip, but there was no holster there. No kunai. No wire. His fingers just brushed against the wet fabric of his trousers. A figure blurred through the gray curtain of rain, landing with a soft squelch on a thick root above the path. It was Kiba. Akamaru wasn't riding on his head or tucked inside his coat like usual. The white dog was standing on the wet ground, his fur matted down by the storm, his tail tucked low between his hind legs. He wasn't growling. He was whining. A low, thin sound that was nearly swallowed by the wind. I knew it was you, Kiba said. His voice was hoarse, his teeth chattering slightly. He wasn't wearing his standard shinobi fur-lined coat. He was just in a dark mesh shirt and his bandages, looking smaller than he did during the Chunin exams. The rain usually messes up the scents, but you smell like iron and that weird red grease from the valley. I followed it from the eastern training fields. You shouldn't be here, Kiba, Naruto said. He kept his eyes fixed on the muddy trail ahead. The Anbu patrol this sector until midnight. Screw the Anbu, Kiba spat, though he quickly glanced over his shoulder into the dark treeline. He wiped a mix of sweat and rain from his nose with the back of his hand. Shikamaru told us. He came by the hospital while the medic nin were changing my dressings. He said the council signed the papers before the sun even went down. Quote. Naruto didn't answer. He just took another step forward. Hey! Don't just walk away from me, you idiot! Kiba yelled, splashing down from the root onto the path, blocking Naruto's way. Akamaru followed, his ears drooped in misery. What do you mean? You're just leaving. After everything. We went into that forest for Sasuke. We nearly got carved up like pork by those sound bastards. Choji is still in a medical seal, Neji's lungs were practically torn in half, and you're just walking north because 3 old people told you to. They're the council, Kiba, Naruto said softly. His voice lacked its usual raspy energy. It was flat, like the surface of a frozen pond. They hold the stamps. If I stay, they put me in a cage under the administration building. If I leave, the village stays safe from the guys in the black coats. We could have hidden you, Kiba said, his fists clenching until his claw-like nails bit into his palms. The Inuzuka compound has underground kennels. The Nara forest is huge. Not even the Hokage's personal guard knows all the valleys in there. We could have figured something out until Tsunade-sama woke up properly. Quote. And then what? Naruto finally looked up. His blue eyes looked dull under the gray sky, stripped of the manic light that usually defined them. You want your mom to lose her clan status for hiding in exile. You want Shikamaru's dad to get stripped of his position. They're looking for an excuse, Kiba. Danzo. He looked at me like I was a broken kunai that was ruining the weapon rack. Akamaru crept forward, nudging his wet nose against Naruto's shin. Naruto looked down, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. He reached down with a cracked hand and scratched behind the dog's ears, just where Akamaru liked it. The dog gave a small, sorrowful whimper. Take care of him, Naruto whispered. Kiba watched the boy's hand. The split knuckles, the absence of the leaf symbol that they had all bled to earn. A heavy, suffocating silence settled between them, filled only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm. They're saying Sasuke's going to be fine, Kiba said, his voice dropping into something small and bitter. The medics said his chakra system will take a month to clean out, but he'll keep his eyes. He's the last Uchiha. They're already setting up extra guards around his ward to make sure he doesn't feel threatened while he recovers. That's good, Naruto said. He needs to be strong if he's going to stay. He tried to kill you, Naruto. Kiba shouted, the frustration finally boiling over. The hole in your chest. I smelled the burnt flesh from 5 lanes away in the hospital. Why are you still talking about him like he's one of us? He left. You stayed. You're the one who always said you were going to be Hokage, so why are you letting them throw you out like garbage? Because a Hokage protects the village, Naruto said. He pulled his hand back from Akamaru and stepped around Kiba, his sandals sinking deep into the mud. Even from himself, Kiba didn't grab him. He stood in the middle of the flooded path, his shoulders shaking under the rain, watching the orange and gray back of his classmate fade into the gloom. If you die out there, Kiba called out, his voice cracking against the wind, I'm never forgiving you. You, Naruto. You hear me? Never. Naruto didn't look back. By midnight, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, freezing fog that clung to the valleys of the northern Fire Ridge. Naruto found a shallow cave beneath an overturned oak tree. The soil inside was relatively dry, protected by the massive root system that stuck up into the air like the ribcage of a dead giant. He dropped his pack onto the ground and sat down, his back against the rough bark. He was shivering now. The Kyuubi's chakra was warm, but it didn't like being used for mundane things like heating wet clothes unless Naruto was angry enough to invoke it. And right now, Naruto didn't feel angry. He just felt empty, like a jar that had been scrubbed clean with sand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It was wrinkled and damp, the edges frayed from where he'd torn it out of his old academy notebook months ago. It was a drawing of the leaf symbol, the spiral with the small triangle on the side. He had drawn it during one of Iruka-sensei's lectures on the First Shinobi World War, back when the classroom smelled like chalk and old wood, and the biggest problem in his life was finding enough money for a large bowl of miso ramen. Iruka-sensei. Naruto muttered to the empty cave. He wondered if Iruka knew yet. He wondered if the man who had given him his first forehead protector was currently sitting at his desk at the academy, looking at an empty seat in the registry where Uzumaki Naruto used to be W. Written in black ink. Would they cross his name out with a red line? Or would they just paste a new piece of paper over it, as if he had never been there at all? You are wasting your fat on sentimentality, a voice hissed from the back of his skull. The darkness of the cave seemed to deepen, the shadows twisting until they looked like the bars of a cage. In his mind's eye, Naruto was standing in the flooded chamber again, the water up to his ankles, looking at the giant iron doors and the white paper seal that kept the fox contained. The Kyuubi's enormous snout pressed against the bars, its hot, sulfurous breath stirring Naruto's hair. Its eyes were 2 pools of liquid fire in the dark. The dog boy was right, the beast mocked, a low, guttural vibration that made Naruto's teeth ache. They gave the Uchiha brat a room with clean sheets and a line of medics to tend to his precious eyes. And you. They kicked you into the dirt before your skin could even grow back. That is the loyalty of the leaf, boy. That is what your father died to protect. Naruto didn't look at the beast. He just sat down in the water of his own subconscious, his legs crossed. He wasn't my father. He was the 4th Hokage. A distinction without a difference, the fox snorted, a blast of red steam escaping its nostrils. He sealed me within his own flesh and blood because he believed the village would see you as a hero. He believed human beings were capable of something other than fear. Look at you now. You are 12 years old, your clothes are rotting on your back, and if the Akatsuki find us tonight, you do not even have a knife to cut your own throat. I have my hands, Naruto said, looking at his split knuckles. Your hands are weak, the Kyuubi snarled, its claws scraping against the iron bars with a sound like tearing metal. They are the hands of a child who still hopes for a warm meal and a kind word. If you want to survive the territories, you must let go of the village. You must let go of the girl who looks through you, the boy who tried to rip your heart out, and the old man who traded you for peace. Quote. Naruto opened his eyes in the real world. The fog outside the cave was turning a pale, ghostly white as the first light of dawn began to leak over the eastern peaks. The air was crisp, smelling of pine resins and cold earth. He looked down at the small piece of paper with the leaf symbol. With slow, deliberate movements, Naruto rolled the paper into a tight cylinder. He didn't burn it. He didn't have flint, but he reached out and shoved it deep into a crevice between two rotting roots of the oak tree. He packed wet mud over the hole until the white of the paper was completely gone, buried under 3 inches of dark, cold earth. I'm not letting go, Naruto said to the forest, his voice firmer now, the first hint of his old steel returning to his tone. I'm just putting it away. He stood up, hoisted his heavy canvas pack onto his shoulders, and walked out into the light of a world that didn't have a name for him anymore. The ghost of the northern ridge. The Tanzaku region was a land of ghosts and broken stone. 2 years had passed since the gates of Konoha had closed behind Naruto. He was 14 now, though his body looked older, hardened by the brutal winters of the northern mountains and a diet consisting mostly of river trout, wild roots, and whatever he could barter for in the lawless border towns. He had grown taller. The gray academy tunic had long since fallen apart, replaced by a dark, sleeveless rogue's coat he'd taken from a bandit who had mistaken a lone traveler for an easy mark. His trousers were black, taped tightly at the shins with worn shinobi bandages. The most striking change, however, was his hair. Without a forehead protector to keep it back, the golden spikes fell wildly over his eyes, shadowing a face that had lost all of its childhood roundness. The whisker marks on his cheeks were thick and dark, almost resembling war paint. Naruto stood on a rocky precipice overlooking a deep ravine. Below him, the ruins of an ancient Uzumaki clan shrine, shattered during the old wars, lay swallowed by creeping vines and moss. This was why he had come north. Not to hide, but to find the pieces of himself that Konoha had never bothered to explain. You're late, Naruto said, not turning around. From the shadow of a massive stone archway, a figure materialized. It wasn't an Anbu tracker, nor was it Jiraiya. It was a woman with sharp, angular features, pale skin, and dark hair pulled into a high ponytail. She wore the plain, uncrested gray robes of a wandering monk, but the way her fingers twitched near her sleeves betrayed the muscle memory of a high-tier killer. This was Toki, a rogue medical nin from the Hot Springs region whom Naruto had pulled from a collapsed mining tunnel a year ago. In exchange for her life, she had taught him how to read the finer anatomical charts she carried in her scroll. The border patrols are heavy today, Toki said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she stepped onto the ledge. A unit from the land of frost crossed the river. They're looking for missing nin. If I were you, Uzumaki, I'd move further into the valleys. Quote. Let them look, Naruto said flatly. He pulled a heavy leather scroll from his pack, a generic sealing script he'd bought from a black market merchant for 3 stolen iron coins. Did you find the ink ingredients I asked for? Quote. Toki sighed, tossing a small canvas pouch at his feet. It clinked with the sound of crushed mineral stones and dried nightshade roots. You're playing with fire, kid. Traditional fuinjutsu requires a steady chakra network and years of academy-honed control. What you're trying to do, using the red chakra to forge physical seals, it's like trying to carve a delicate porcelain doll with a claymore. The normal way doesn't work for me, Naruto replied. He knelt down on the rock, pouring the black mineral powder into a small stone mortar. My internal network is too loud. If I try to mold normal chakra into a fine line, the fox's weight crushes the thread. I have to make the seal heavy enough to withstand the pressure. He didn't mention the real reason. For the past 6 months, The seal on his stomach had begun to itch. Not a physical itch, but a burning, corrosive heat that woke him up in the middle of the night, vomiting blood onto the dirt floor of his cave. The fourth Hokage's lock was slipping, reacting to Naruto's growing physical strength. If he didn't learn how to anchor his own spiritual energy, the Kyuubi would bleed through his pores before he turned 16. The girl speaks the truth, little pest. The fox's voice vibrated through the marrow of his bones, more distinct now than it had been 2 years ago. You are trying to build a dam out of mud to stop an ocean. Let the lock break. Let me out, and we will burn the frost ninjas together. Shut up. Naruto thought back, his grip tightening on the stone pestle until the knuckles turned white. If I let you out, I'm just a monster in a cage. I'm going to be the one holding the key. Toki watched him, her eyes tracking the subtle, rhythmic twitching of his facial muscles. You're talking to it again. It doesn't have anyone else to talk to, Naruto muttered, dipping a coarse hairbrush into the dark, toxic ink he had just ground down. He pulled up the hem of his dark coat, exposing his torso. The spiral seal on his abdomen was visible, but it looked different now. The black lines were surrounded by faint, jagged scars where the skin had burned and peeled away during his training sessions. With a steady hand that didn't belong to a 14-year-old, Naruto pressed the brush against his own skin, drawing a wide, secondary ring around the original seal. The ink bit into his flesh like liquid fire, the nightshade and mineral salts reacting with his highly acidic chakra. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just breathed through his nose, his exhalations coming out as white plumes of steam in the cold mountain air. You're crazy, Toki whispered, taking a step back. That's a stabilization array used for sealing rampaging summoning beasts. You're applying it to your own nervous system. If it works for a giant toad, it works for me, Naruto said, his voice straining slightly as he finished the final stroke of the character for anchor. Single quote. The moment the circle closed, a violent pulse of crimson chakra erupted from his stomach, shattering the stone mortar beside him into dust. The red energy didn't form the bubbling, terrifying shroud of the Kyuubi. Instead, it was forced inward by the new seal, compressing tightly against his bones. Naruto collapsed onto his hands and knees, the rock cracking beneath his palms. He let out a choked groan, his teeth bared as his veins turned a violent, glowing orange beneath his skin. The pain was absolute, like having boiling lead poured directly into his bone marrow. Naruto. Toki reached for her medical kit, but a sudden pressure in the air froze her in her tracks. The gravity around the ledge seemed to double. Small pebbles began to float upward, suspended in the dense, vibrating field of pure force radiating from the boy. Naruto's eyes, when he raised his head, were completely bloodshot, the blue iris nearly swallowed by a dark, dangerous violet, the literal blending of his human spirit with the demonic energy of the beast. He didn't lose his mind. He didn't scream. Slowly, inches at a time, Naruto forced himself back to his feet. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and the floating pebbles dropped back to the earth with a dull clatter. The orange glow beneath his skin faded, leaving behind a cold, terrifyingly quiet aura. He looked at his hands. They weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in 2 years, the constant, background roar of the Kyuubi's thoughts felt distant, pushed behind a heavy, iron door of his own making. I can control the output now, Naruto said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register that made Toki's skin crawl. A fraction of it, but it's mine. Before Toki could reply, a sharp thwack echoed from the trees behind them. A kunai with an exploding tag attached to the hilt buried itself in the dirt 3 feet from Naruto's boots. The paper tag was already burning down. Get down! Toki yelled, diving behind the ancient stone archway. Naruto didn't move. He didn't even look at the tag. He simply raised his left hand, the new anchor seal on his stomach flaring with a cold, blue-purple light. As the tag detonated in a flash of orange fire and smoke, Naruto swung his bare palm through the blast. A shockwave of compressed chakra tore through the smoke, snuffing out the explosion before the heat could even singe his clothes. The sheer kinetic force of the swing cleared the clearing, blowing the mist back into the ravine. 3 shinobi wearing the gray flak jackets of the Land of Frost dropped from the canopy, their swords drawn, their faces pale with shock. What kind of monster? The lead ninja stammered, his eyes widening as he noticed the lack of a forehead protector on the blonde boy. He didn't even use a hand sign. Is he a rogue from the cloud? Naruto looked at them. There was no anger in his eyes, no wild declaration of his name, no shouting about dreams or recognition. There was only the cold, functional silence of a survivor. You're in my clearing, Naruto said, his feet shifting into a low, grounded stance he had carved out through hundreds of lonely repetitions. Leave the swords. Walk away. Or find out how heavy this mountain really is. Quote. The unshackled fox. The edge of the northern ridge was cold, but the air inside the gorge was boiling. The 3 frost shinobi didn't run. In the mercenary territories between nations, running from a lone target was a death sentence for a squad's reputation. The lead ninja, a scar-faced man with heavy iron plates on his shoulders, spat into the dirt and raised his long sword, the blade humming with a thin, erratic layer of lightning chakra. He's just a stray, the scar-faced man growled to his men. No village crest, no backup. Break his legs and take the girl. She's worth a few hundred ryo to the underground medics in the Frost capital. Naruto didn't blink. He stood perfectly still, his long, wild blonde hair casting shadows across his face. The new anchor seal beneath his dark tunic throbbed against his skin, a steady, heavy pulse that felt like a localized earthquake inside his ribs. I gave you a choice, Naruto said. His voice wasn't the loud, brassy shout of the boy who used to crave attention. It was low, raspy, and carried the terrifying weight of absolute certainty. Die, brat. The 2 flanking frost ninjas blurred forward, their movements synchronized. One dropped low, sweeping a chain scythe aimed at Naruto's ankles, while the other leapt into the air, throwing a volley of poison tea. PPED Senbon needles designed to pin his arms to his sides. Naruto didn't draw a weapon. He didn't have to. With a sudden, violent twist of his torso, he drove his right heel into the stone platform beneath him. Crack. The solid granite fractured like cheap ice. Using the raw, compressed physical power of his newly stabilized chakra, Naruto moved so fast the air itself let out a sharp boom of displaced pressure. He appeared directly in front of the midair ninja. The man's eyes widened in sheer terror as he realized the blonde boy had literally bypassed the space between them without a single hand sign. Naruto's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around the ninja's throat with the crushing force of an iron vice. Too slow. A voice echoed from Naruto's chest. A double tone, half human, half demon. Naruto slammed the ninja straight down into the rocky ground. The impact was immense, shattering the stone and knocking the breath from the man's lungs in a bloody spray. Without stopping to watch him drop, Naruto spun on his heel, his bare left hand catching the incoming chain scythe by the bare metal links. The iron links groaned, biting into his skin, but the wound didn't bleed red. A thick, boiling purple mist hissed from the friction, instantly sealing the scratches before they could form. What are you? The scythe-wielding ninja stammered, trying to yank his weapon back, but it felt like the chain had been welded into the side of a mountain. Naruto yanked the chain toward himself. The frost ninja was pulled off his feet, flying helplessly through the air. As the man reached him, Naruto delivered a short, brutal punch straight into his sternum. The sound of ribs collapsing echoed through the canyon, and the ninja skipped across the ground like a flat stone on water before going completely still against the rock wall. 2 down. In less than 4 seconds. Toki watched from behind the archway, her hands pressed against her mouth. She had seen high-level Jonin fight before, but this wasn't ninjutsu. This was pure, unadulterated physical dominance, a body using its own internal energy as a biological battering ram. The scar-faced leader stepped back, his lightning-infused sword trembling. The confidence had completely vanished from his face, replaced by the instinctual horror of a predator realizing it had walked into the den of something infinitely higher on the food chain. The 9 tails, the leader whispered, his gaze dropping to the dark, whisker-like scars on Naruto's cheeks. You're the ghost from the leaf. The outcast. I'm nobody's ghost, Naruto said, taking a slow step forward. With every step he took, the purple-red aura around him grew thicker, rising from his shoulders like heavy incense smoke. The Kyuubi within him was laughing now, a roaring, deep sound that filled Naruto's mind with visions of fire and blood, but the anchor seal held firm. The beast wasn't taking over, it was being funneled. Naruto was the barrel, and the fox was the gunpowder. Let me have his head, boy, the Kyuubi roared in his ears, its massive crimson eyes spinning in the dark of the seal. Let us show these insects what happens when they cross our border. No, Naruto muttered aloud, his blue-purple eyes locking onto the leader. He's going to carry a message. The scar-faced man broke. He threw his sword down and turned to flee, his boots skidding on the wet pine needles as he scrambled toward the tree line. Naruto didn't chase him. He simply raised his right hand, making a single, claw-like gesture in the air. The purple chakra mist around his arm condensed, lengthening into a massive, ghostly fox claw that shot across the clearing with terrifying speed. The ethereal claw slammed into the trees just ahead of the fleeing man, exploding 3 massive oak trees into matchwood and blocking his escape route. A wall of splintered timber and smoking earth. The leader fell backward into the mud, staring up at the smoking ruins of the forest. Naruto walked over, standing above the trembling man. The heat radiating from the 14-year-old's body was so intense that the rain-soaked grass beneath his sand dolls was turning to steam. Tell the merchants in the border towns, Naruto said, his voice quiet, almost gentle, which made it 10 times more terrifying. Tell the rogue nin, the bounty hunters, and anyone else looking for an easy mark. The Northern Territory belongs to the Uzumaki now. If you come here to hunt, you become the meat. The leader nodded frantically, his teeth clicking together so hard a piece of his molar chipped off. He didn't look back as he crawled over the shattered trees and disappeared into the dark valley. The clearing went quiet again, save for the crackle of the burning wood where the chakra had touched it. The purple aura slowly receded, pulling back through Naruto's pores like ink being sucked back into a pen. The anchor seal on his stomach cooled down, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache that reminded him he was still human, still flesh and blood. He staggered slightly, his knees buckling for a second before he caught himself on a large piece of stone. Toki stepped out from her hiding place, her medical kit already in her hands. She ran over, her fingers glowing with the soft green light of medical chakra as she reached for his torso. Sit down, you idiot. Your internal temperature is nearly 105 degrees. If you don't cool your core down, your organs are going to cook themselves. I'm fine, Naruto grunted, though he let her press the cool, healing energy against his chest. The fox. He mends it faster than it burns. That doesn't mean it doesn't leave scars, Naruto, she said softly, her eyes tracking the deep, jagged red marks that now lined his ribs. You're changing. Your chakra doesn't even feel human anymore. It feels ancient, like a force of nature. Naruto looked down at his reflection in a puddle of water that had formed on the shattered stone. His face was hard now. The innocent, Goofy expression he used to wear to make people like him was entirely gone, replaced by the sharp, lean lines of a young man who had spent 2 years sleeping with one eye open. He looked like a weapon that had been forged in a furnace and then left in the rain to harden. Good, Naruto said, his blue eyes staring back at him from the dark water. Nature doesn't care about counsels. It doesn't care about promises it couldn't keep. He stood up, shaking off the last of the fatigue, and looked back toward the south, toward the distant, hidden valleys where the walls of Konoha stood, thick and safe behind their barriers. He didn't hate them anymore. Hate required too much energy, and he needed every drop of his strength for what was coming. The Akatsuki were still out there, searching the world for the pieces of the puzzle, and sooner or later, they would realize He Leaf didn't have the fox anymore. They would look north. Let's go, Toki, Naruto said, picking up his heavy canvas pack from the dirt. We need to find a new camp before the frost sets in. As they walked into the deep shadows of the northern mountains, the wind howled through the ravine, carrying the sound of a lone wolf. Or perhaps, something with 9 tails, laughing in the dark. End of part 1.